This is a 5th, 6th grade lesson that's adapted from the Buttons task, which is a grade 5 lesson. This is talking about numeric patterns. And this entire lesson also includes a number talk where he activates some of the ideas in this lesson through a what's my rule task. So he says, all right, I want you guys to guess. Here's the numbers that we start with, and then you guess numbers and I will plot them and you try and guess what my rule is. The students spend some time arguing and debating about what the rule might be and whether or not different numbers work within the constraints that he's done. And then they go into this task, the Buttons task, in which there is a growing pattern. So I'll take you into this. Just like with the others, this has the entire set of resources that has to do with it, the entire packet, implications for instruction, the task, rubric, and so on. And the challenges really are that we want to have them use these multiple representations, a pictorial and a verbal representation as well as a mathematical representation, to demonstrate how to represent this numeric pattern. And then the challenges is that these students are going to have different understandings of this. So Dickinson is using an evaluation of different strategies that hypothetical students have used with this task, and asking the students to evaluate the effectiveness of those strategies. So if I click on this lesson video, I'll just take you through the different resources that are here. We have Dickinson planning this with his math coach and other faculty at his school, and talking about how they're revisiting this problem-solving task that they'd already experienced. And he explains somewhat of how he approaches this idea of re-engagement. He talks about it as a learner-centered activity wherein the original task is posed in such a way that we may expose learners to different strategies, alternative solutions, or even misconceptions. So he's using this task and visiting it twice as a form of formative assessment. Then when you go into the lesson itself, it begins with his number talk. So you can see here in the background, and again, I'm not going to play these videos because you can certainly do that on your own time. But he's got an X and a Y, and then he's got a graph over here so that he can say, okay, well, what is this rule? And the students go through and they're trying to reason through it. They're going to have a number, and he's talking about they're going to have a numbers task, and then they're going to look at the buttons task. So he takes them through this and then goes into problem 1. This is where they're reviewing a copy of 2 students' work on the buttons task. So again, this is a way in which you could use these successful examples of student work and these student misconceptions that come with these Mars materials, so that you can have your students do this kind of thinking, or as Dickinson did, you can take a look at your students' previous work before this. But he's asking the students to reason among themselves and talk about what were these learners' strategies, and were they effective or were they not effective. Then he asks them, building on one of the students' insights, she says, where does the 4 come from? So the student Kelsey asks this question first of her classmates and then of her partner Maddie. Maddie has a clear understanding of how learner B sees the pattern growing, +3, but then where is the 4 coming from? So and in this commentary you can see that Dickinson is looking very closely at this video of his students working together so that he can help you understand the context for these 2 students grappling with this particular content. Throughout this lesson, he has the students coming up to the board, explaining their thinking, and so on. Interestingly, he has one student who is in a full inclusion setting who is hard of hearing, and so he has a partner teacher up here who's doing sign language interpretation throughout. So if, for example, one of the things that you'd like to see is how seamlessly students with special needs can be integrated into the content of the lesson, you can see that here as well. Then, after the lesson, there's a student debrief where several of the students go through and reflect on what they learned, what was hard for them, what new insights they have, and so on. So there was an interview with some students, parts 1 and 2 with the math coach who was working with Dickinson on this. And then lastly, Dickinson himself is interviewing some of these students. Then, just as before with some of the other examples, we have a debrief between Dickinson and his colleagues at his school about what the students seem to learn. And again, because you've got his reflection as well as this resource, you can hear how he, for example, is saying, I really like Stacey Emery's description of how learners might gain a deeper understanding of pictorial representations and how to model a function by looking more closely at the relationship between the numerical and pictorial relationships. So I think that this is a really interesting task. You can see here that this is actually an example of how this pattern is growing. And when you see that each time there's 3 being added, but where does that 4 come? The 4 comes from the initial 4 buttons in this pattern. So let's go on and we'll look at one of the other public lessons here. We're ascending within the grade levels here, so we'll take a look at Antoinette Villerin, who's in 7th grade. Her task is asking students to prove their understanding of perimeter and area in a task that's called pizza crust. So if I open up the task here for a moment, you can see that what the pizza crust is asking to do is say, okay, what's the relationship between the outside of an object, right, the crust in this case, and the inside of an object? And so the task here is that, Robbie loves the stuffed crusts on pizzas. Here are some stuffed crust pizza shapes that are baked, right? There are different dimensions here. How many inches of stuffed crust are put around the edge of each of these pizzas? And then if, for example, here you could say, design 2 rectangular pizzas, each with an area of 36 square inches with different perimeter, so that Robbie will have more crust than on the square pizza. In each case, calculate what the perimeter will be. So this is the task that the students are engaged with in this particular lesson. Again, there's these resources of the rubric, the core mathematical ideas and challenges, and so on. As we click to the lesson video, we can see Antoinette Villerin working with her 2 colleagues, a math coach and her partner teacher of the 7th grade, in talking about what's their plan, what is their strategy for the lesson, how are they hoping to do it. Some of the context for this particular lesson is that she and her colleague, Patty Ferrant, had planned on co-teaching this lesson. However, on the day of the actual lesson, Ms. Ferrant found that she had laryngitis. Happens to the best of us, right? And so some of what good teaching is adapting spontaneously to the vicissitudes of the day, as it were. So if we click through here, you can see here's her introduction. Here's the problem 1. Since our lesson is based on student misconceptions, we chose 2 responses from previous student work and pushed students to deepen their thinking about area. Then as they go through, you'll see again and again that she's saying, prove it. How can you prove it? And so she's actually trying to get them to understand this idea of square units of measurement. So again, like with the others, you can go through here and you can see all the examples of student work here. You can advance throughout them by clicking on the next button here. And you can see, how did these students approach this task? And then at the end of the lesson, in this closure and debrief, in the closure, they ask their students to reflect on their learning, whether this re-engagement lesson helped them in correcting any mistakes they had made on their first attempt. Since our goal was to address these misconceptions, we wanted to know if students felt that they could be more successful a second time around. Then you can see these student think sheets. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll get it right after, because working with the blocks helped. This student says, yes, because I understand area and perimeter better, and so on. This one says, I think Ms. Ferrant if she gives us the problem again, I would probably pass it because I learned more about the area and perimeter. So again, you can think about how these students' insights compare to your own in your own setting.